What makes for a good character in Pathfinder? Is it the damage you do? Is it your DPR? Is it your ability to apply battlefield control? Is it how explosive you are, or is it how reliable you are? Does the game reward you for specializing or for diversifying? The answer is all of the above. Hello everyone! Welcome to Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder optimization needs. This channel is all about analyzing Pathfinder's math and applying that math to practical gameplay and build decisions. My goal is to help players build characters that are powerful, useful, and optimized, whatever that optimization means to you. And I want to do this by providing you with the tools to make your own builds, not by providing you with builds that I consider optimized. If it's your first time here, welcome. Glad to have you. If you've been here before, thank you for your continued support. This channel wouldn't be continuing without you. On to the video. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than my last two. This is sort of my way of introducing the overall point of this channel. These past two videos, I teased you with these larger concepts that my videos are referring to. Up here, you see me talking about the Hypnotize spell, where I get a little bit into the value of generic versus situational. Up here, you see me talking about the Acid Grip spell, where I get into reliability versus not being reliable. So how do you evaluate the power of something in this game? Those are two completely different ways of evaluating whether something's powerful or not. Is the situational option always stronger? Not quite. I allude to that in the Hypnotize video. You should always be considering something like slow, not just using Hypnotize all the time. Is the reliable option always stronger? Is it a bad idea to use Shove over Acid Grip? Not really. If you've played the game, you know Acid Grip costs a spell slot, and at least at certain level ranges, that spell slot might be really valuable, so you have to consider using Shove. I want to make sure that we are all on the same page when we talk about something's power in the future. I will likely be referencing the terminology I establish in this video often during my future analyses, and I want to make it clear this is just terminology to make sure we're all on the same page. I have had disagreements where someone said, what you call reliable is not reliable because it consumes a spell slot, so I can only do it once in a day. That's fair. We both have different definitions of reliability, but we have to be on the same page when arguing about something, right? Having this common baseline will help a lot with future videos. It'll help speed things up and make sure we all know what I'm saying when I say something is more powerful in one way. The key reason to do all this is so we can answer the very important question of, how do you know if something is more powerful than something else? When evaluating the relative power of something in this game, there are 5 fundamental axes that we'll measure it along. To start with, there's a baseline that we're just trying to achieve something. Anytime we spend actions, we're trying to achieve an outcome. The first point to consider is the potency of that outcome. How big of an impact will you have when you do this thing? If you're trying to do damage, how much damage are we talking about? If we're trying to prevent damage, how much damage are we preventing? If we're trying to debuff the enemy, how big is the debuff? How many actions are you taking away, or how many numbers are you taking away? If you're trying to control the battlefield, how will this shape the rest of the battle for both your enemies and your friends? All of these combined form the raw power axis. And there are 4 more fundamental axes, so clearly raw power is not the only thing that matters, but it does matter. The second one to consider is reliability. How likely is it that you will achieve the outcome you're hoping for? How likely is it that you'll achieve the outcome you're hoping for at the power level you're hoping for? How does the enemy's level affect this? Them being higher level makes it worse, and them being lower level makes it better. How much of an impact will that have on your plans? How do the enemy's numbers affect this? Numbers can also affect reliability, which is something I'll do a detailed mathematical analysis on later, but it does matter. All of these combined are the second fundamental axis. The third is efficiency. How many things can you fit into a turn while trying to achieve what you want? At its most basic level, how many actions does it cost you to do the thing you want? Does this action have any impact on any future actions? For example, if you're taking a strike, that impacts anything with the attack trait in the future with the multiple attack penalty. That matters. Does it have any taxes you pay either before or after the action? For example, entering a stance or having to recharge this action in some way, like a Magus' spell strike. Do you commit these actions ahead of time, or can you quit halfway through? For example, 2 strikes is different than a 2-action activity, because if the first strike misses or hits, you might just leave, do something else, but you can't change your decision once you've committed 2 actions to something. All of these matter because They shape how you plan out your turn, how much you can fit into your turn, and that's why these form the third axis. The fourth is sustainability. How many times can you do this thing again and again? Does it cost you a daily resource of some kind, like a spell slot or a wand? Does it cost you an encounter level resource of some kind, like a focus point or a once per 10 minutes ability? Does it cost you any permanent items that you're carrying, like consumables or talismans or caltrops? All of these can matter. And finally, and something that a lot of people often ignore, take those three things I mentioned before. Does you taking this action cost somebody else any of these three things? If you run into melee and just get down by a crit, you're costing your cleric healing slots, and that means your actions are the ones that are non-sustainable. That is a very important part of sustainability, and all these together form the fourth pillar. The fifth and final is versatility. How many different things can you achieve? How quickly can you switch between achieving those things? Do you have a single option that achieves multiples of those things? Or do you have to pay some kind of a tax to switch between them? Is that a tax you can pay in the middle of an encounter, between multiple encounters, or between multiple adventuring days? Finally, how much are you rewarded for this versatility? How likely is it that something will come up where this versatility will enable your party to succeed in a way they otherwise wouldn't? Altogether, these are the 5 fundamentals of power, and every time I reference something being powerful or something being weak on this channel, this is the baseline that I'm arguing along. I'll be talking along something being better in one of these and worse in another. And if there's too many trade-offs, I might consider it a bad option. And if there's a lot of upsides, it's a good option. Now, there's one simple, often inconvenient truth about Pathfinder. No one can win at everything. There's no single playstyle that is always going to be better along all 5 axes compared to another playstyle. If you take 2 well-built characters, there's going to be one of them who's better in some aspects and one of them who's better in other aspects. Of course, if you take one that just dumped their main stat, they're just gonna be bad, but that's besides the point. If there are individual character options you're evaluating, you will sometimes find that something is just better than another option in every single way. For example, if you're comparing Fear to the spell Enfeeble. Enfeeble is practically an irrelevant spell. There's almost no reason to cast it. This will happen for individual character options like 1 feat or 1 spell compared to everything else. It's not going to happen for the character as a whole if the character is reasonably well built. When you optimize in Pathfinder, you're not optimizing to just win the game. You're optimizing within a niche you're hoping to build into, and that should be your focus. I will get into that in a bit more detail later in this video. So that being said, here's a few examples of not being able to win at everything. Everything in this game exists along the spectrum, along these fundamental axes that I'm talking about. To see these fundamental axes in action, we can compare broad strokes playstyles, just to get the point across a little. The first up is casters versus marshals. Casters have the advantage in potency, reliability, and versatility. Marshals have the advantage in efficiency and sustainability. You've already seen the reliability advantages of casters. Spells just do what they have to do more often than not, significantly more often than a skill action of an equivalent rank. This applies to damage too. It's not just skills, it's not just non-damage outcomes. Caster damage is very reliable, and if you don't believe me, please wait around until I do a deep dive video onto this very topic. I think it's coming soon. I'll get into exactly why I consider caster damage to be the more reliable of the two. Casters also have the advantage in potency. This is less magnified with things like damage, because the damage that you do is only more potent than a ranged martial if it comes out of your maximum couple ranks of spell slots. But it's very obvious with spells that achieve things that martials would otherwise achieve with skills. Acid Grip is just so much better than Shove or Reposition in so many different ways, and there's a bunch of other spells that achieve similar outcomes as skills that have the exact same thing going on. If you compare Fear to using the Demoralize action, it's not really close. Fear is both more reliable and more potent. By the time the martial has upgraded their use of Demoralize by using Battle Cry or other such skill feats, the caster is now using a higher rank Fear, which, again, just outshines anything that those skill feats can do. And finally, versatility. This kind of goes without saying, but a high-level caster's versatility is not something that any martial can really compare to. You can build some very versatile martials in this system. You can build one who keeps a hand empty, is constantly grappling, is constantly shoving, is using Demoralize or Recall Knowledge, has very good defenses and very good mobility. It just won't compare to the sheer magnitude of nonsense a spellcaster can do. A spellcaster can enter a battle and say, hey, I have figured out this enemy's gimmick, I'm going to turn that gimmick off. I'm going to make the flying enemy land on the ground, I am going to turn off their reactions if they have a dangerous reaction. I'm going to trigger their weakness every single turn. Some enemies have unique gimmicks that you can target. It is just a different level of versatility that no matter how versatile your martial is, it's not really keeping up with spellcaster versatility, with probably a few exceptions. Martials have efficiency. Everything a martial does is balanced around using one action rather than two. If they use two actions, they're usually committing it to something very high risk, high reward. Conversely, when they use that one action, especially the first strike or athletics maneuver they make in a turn, it is balanced to be more impactful than a typical action that anyone in the game can take. This efficiency means they can usually fit a lot more value into the turn. They don't have to be restricted by spells that cost 2 or 3 actions the way spellcasters do. They can often use one action to achieve impact and then do 2 actions worth of things split in the way they prefer. And of course, there's sustainability. If you're not the alchemist, and probably in the future the commander, you don't have to worry about daily resources. You just do your thing and you do it again and again. Some martials rely on encounter level resources like focus spells for a monk or ranger, but by and large, they're just more sustainable in a vacuum. You can cost your party sustainability, as I mentioned, but again, a caster can do that too. The caster's costing themselves resources and potentially the party, whereas a marshal's just costing their party. So marshals do have a distinct sustainability advantage. Whatever they try to do, they're doing it without spending as many resources. That's the first playstyle analysis. On to the second. There's situational versus generic. Situational options are usually designed to be higher impact, higher reliability, and higher efficiency than generic options. You can see this by looking at very extreme cases. If your GM throws a challenge at you, hey, there's a key at the bottom of the lake, go get it. There's nothing better than water breathing. You're going to give everyone in your party the ability to breathe water. Its potency is practically infinite because it just wins this combat encounter without any conversation or check. Likewise for its reliability, there was no check. And efficiency, you just committed 2 actions, probably out of combat, and if you get into a combat underwater, this is not costing you any additional resources. You're fine. Situational options and generic options obviously exist along a spectrum. Not all situational options will have as magnified a value in potency, reliability, and efficiency as water breathing just did, but the closer the gap, the closer their advantages and disadvantages. So generics advantages will also get closer. For example, if you're comparing action denial versus reaction denial, action denial is generically good, it works on everyone. Reaction denial is only good if an enemy has a dangerous reaction. But they're close together. It's not like reaction denial is useless if you bring it to the adventuring day, right? So it's less situational than a lot of other things, but still more situational than action denial. Likewise, generic options have a sustainability and versatility advantage. The sustainability advantage may not be easy to see. Oftentimes, when you prepare something situational, you're doing it via some sort of a resource. For example, I mentioned water breathing. That costs a spell slot. If you're a level 5 wizard who has 11 spell slots, if you prepared 3 of them for highly situational uses, you now have 8 spell slots, not 11. Preparing these situational options cost you your daily sustainability. Therefore, generic options are more sustainable. And versatility is because having generic options available means you can take on more challenges. You won't be as good at any of those challenges as the situational option. That's why they have those 3 wins, potency, reliability, and efficiency. But you can take on so many more challenges than the situational option. The third playstyle to consider is melee versus ranged. Melee has the potency advantage and the reliability advantage. Potency comes from the fact that you inflict more damage, you inflict harsher conditions than you can from a range. Compare the action denial of Trip to the -1 from Demoralize. Compare the damage from a halberd to the damage from a bow. You're more potent in melee, and you're more reliable because you can achieve flanking more easily. You're easier to buff, and it's easier to debuff the enemy's defenses when you're around. Both of these advantages get magnified by melee's use of reactions. Melee oftentimes have really powerful reactions like Reactive Strike or Champion's Reaction. Both of these are very highly potent and highly reliable options, and melee characters are often filled with such really good options. The ranged characters, on the other hand, have the advantage for efficiency, sustainability, and versatility. Efficiency is because you don't have to move up to your enemy. You can stay back. You don't have to get grappled by your enemy or restrained by your enemy. You don't have to get tripped by your enemy. Even when you're affected by things, oftentimes being far away will mean you're affected less by these things. The most extreme, of course, is there's less of a chance that you'll just be dropped to 0 HP and lose 2 or 3 actions standing up and picking up all your shit. So ranged is more efficient. And of course, it's more sustainable for many of the same reasons. If it's harder to deny you actions, you're unlikely to drain your party's actions keeping you up. If you go unconscious less often, you need fewer heals. Melee characters typically need more resources from the party as a whole to keep standing and keep fighting. And finally, versatility. This one's a subtler advantage for the ranged character, but it's there. You have more options from a range. If I, as a wizard, threw a fireball at a group of 3 people, and the one furthest away from us crit failed, the ranged character can just shoot 2 arrows at that enemy. The melee character might not be able to get the one that's furthest away, or might have to spend multiple strides getting there. They might feel forced to attack a less efficient target, one that's at higher health. You have more limited options when you're in melee. For example, you have to stand in flanking position a lot of the time, and that reduces both your options and your party's options. So ranged characters have more versatility, even before just getting into the fact that from a range you can use bombs, special ammunition, spells much more easily than you can from a melee distance. So that is that for the third playstyle. The fourth one we're comparing is healing versus mitigating. Healing has high potency because, have you looked at the healing numbers? Heal and Soothe heal for so much damage, and it makes sense. If you're healing somebody who is already taking damage, you better be healing them for a lot. Otherwise, the healing you do doesn't matter. They also have very high reliability. Healing always happens after your friend has taken the damage, which means you can make your decision with more information. If your friend is at low health, but there's only 1 minion left alive, just don't heal them. You don't have to waste any time. Therefore, you know that the decisions you make will matter. If you're protecting your friends proactively, you have no guarantee those decisions will matter. If you cast resist energy ahead of time, you're taking the risk that the enemy might never even use that damage type, for example. And similarly, sustainability keys off of many of the same arguments for reliability. If you don't have to spend your spell slot ahead of time, there's a high chance you don't spend that spell slot. Then mitigating damage has the efficiency advantage and the versatility advantage. Efficiency because you might spend these actions up front on turn 1 or 2 of the battle, and then spend minimal action economy on them, whereas somebody healing someone may spend 2 action heal again and again, depending on how much damage output a combat has. It's much easier to be efficient while mitigating damage, and that's not to mention that a lot of damage mitigation options are reactions, which are, of course, much more efficient than spending actions, right? Especially if a backliner is doing them. A spellcaster using the Hidebound spell is very efficient in mitigating damage. And of course, there's versatility. If you have a party built around mitigating damage, you will notice that more different players are able to do more different things at any given time, because healing is often kind of an emergency situation. It forces you to do a thing, whereas mitigating is proactive. You prevent the thing from happening, opening up your options for the future. That goes into a few examples of how these fundamentals can be used to evaluate the benefits of different playstyles. And I hope you found these helpful, because I'm going to be using these fundamentals a lot. If more examples are needed or a more detailed video on this is needed, leave some feedback in the comments. I'd be happy to hear about it. I make no secret of the fact that I enjoy optimizing my characters, so presumably I have an audience that also loves optimizing. So your burning question must be, what does all this mean when you're optimizing your character? The first thing you want to consider is, what does optimizing even mean in this game? It definitely doesn't mean winning at character creation, because that's not something that happens in this game. It means looking at these fundamental axes, fundamental pillars of power, as I've called them, and figuring out where your character lands on these. Are you trying to emphasize your strengths by having equally egregious weaknesses? Are you trying to downplay your strengths because that'll naturally cover for your weaknesses? Both of these are viable, and both of these are fun ways to play the game. But you can't forget that every decision you make has to be made with your party in mind. Pathfinder is a team game. If you don't build with your party in mind, chances are you have introduced a weakness to your character. You might be placing a burden on one of your friends to cover for, which is not great. If you build a character whose whole concept is, I carry 2 swords and I run into combat and I hit people, and you have no defenses, no tactical nuance to the way you play, you are putting the burden on somebody to heal you all the time. And if nobody volunteered to be a healer, this character has introduced a weakness into the party and has honestly introduced a social etiquette problem into the party. You're forcing somebody else to be your healer. That's not good. So always think of the party while you're building your character, and always think of the decisions you make in combat while building your character. Because in Pathfinder, optimization happens at the table more so than it happens while building your character. Every tactical decision you make also falls on these pillars that I mentioned, and also contributes to how well your party performs and how awesome your character feels in-game. Finally, we all love a good metric. That's why we all love DPR, right? How do we measure these metrics that I mentioned? Some of them are clearly a bit more tractable to analysis, like potency. You can just measure the amount of damage you do, or measure the impact of certain things you do. Reliability, I already showed you how I like to measure reliability with the asset grip video. The other metrics, I will introduce them over time as I release more and more videos. This video would be hours long if I went into a deep dive of every single metric, but the important part is play experience trumps metrics. You of course do need both. Metrics will inform decisions you make before playing, and then you may course correct depending on your play experience. Anytime your play experience contradicts the metrics I provided, ignore the metrics I provided, because you play at your table. You know best. Try to avoid certain biases, but of course, ultimately how you feel about the game is more important than what the metrics tell you to feel about the game. These metrics will come out in time though, so any math addicts in this channel, be ready for it. So that'll be all for today's video, folks. I've covered the fundamental axes of optimization: potency, reliability, efficiency, sustainability, and versatility. Remember these 5. These 5 are broad enough yet specific enough to help you have a helpful conversation about what's more effective, what's less effective. And now we're all on the same page, which means when I refer to these things in the future, you know what I'm talking about. We don't have to have disagreements about whether it's more reliable or not to do a thing, because that's probably covered by one of the other 4 axes. If I need to refine these in time, I might re-release this video, but I don't think I need to. I feel like these are the 5 ways of evaluating the strength of what I did that come up again and again throughout my gameplay experience in Pathfinder. I have been Mathfinder, folks. Please like and subscribe and comment if you agree or disagree with anything I've said. I'm always happy to hear more feedback. See you next time.